It's verses 45 through 52. So our story so far, Jesus miraculously, he feeds thousands of people. There's 12 baskets of leftovers. The people are hanging around, so at about evening time, Jesus sends those folks away. Go home. We're done here for today. And about the same time, he sends his disciples into a boat to cross the Sea of Galilee to go over to Bethsaida. And then Jesus goes up on a mountain to pray, and the disciples, they get out in the middle of the sea, and the winds are whipped up against them, and they're rowing with all they got. Everything they have, they're rowing. The windstorm was no surprise to Jesus, by the way. And Jesus sees them. He sees them in the middle of the night, towards morning, actually, after they've been rowing for probably 9-ish or so hours with this windstorm. And it's likely if they've been rowing it says they're in the midst of the sea, they're 3 or 4 miles away, in the middle of the dark, without any kind of modern optics or lighting to help him see them. He's Jesus, right? How do you reckon he's able to see him? Well, it's the same way he's able to see you and me. Anyway, the disciples, they're rowing with all they got. But what we don't get a sense of in any of the records of this event is that they're praying. And in fact, there's this moment where Jesus is coming out to them. He's walking on the water, and they think they're seeing a ghost. And it's also really likely they've never seen a ghost before. But one thing is for certain, what they don't expect to see is they don't expect to see Jesus. And when we get to the editorial comment on this thing, likely Peter is relaying this to Mark years and years later, is that the reason that they didn't recognize Jesus was that they didn't understand the miracle Jesus had done in feeding all these people. And they didn't understand it, the Bible tells us, not because it was super hard to understand. They didn't understand it because their hearts were hard. Here's that verse 52. For they had not gained any insight from the incident of the loaves, but their heart was hardened. So here's the likely scenario. Peter is talking to Mark years later, and maybe it goes something like this if we were to put it in our own language today. Mark, it's crazy to think that when it happened, our hearts were still so hard, so rigid, we were truly dull as rocks that we missed it in the moment. We didn't put the facts together, even after Jesus had fed all those people and all the other stuff that he had done. You see, the Greek word for insight in the passage is suneami, and it literally means to put the facts together. Anybody in here ever fail to put the facts together? Me too. And the phrase, their heart was hardened, in the Greek means just what I said there in common English, dull as rocks. Anybody in here ever been dull as a rock? Anybody in here dull as a rock today? I've been there too. So when we started looking at this passage a few weeks ago, though, I told you there's a big payoff in this, and I really think there is. Because I know I can be dull as a rock. I know I can fail to put the facts together. I can miss the moment pretty easily. Anybody in here feeling what I'm saying? Anybody else you can miss it. But the payoff is that the gospel takes all of that into account. And God still rescues. Our lives are the story of this rescue. Now the story obviously affects us. It saves us after all. But the story isn't primarily about us. It's just that we're in it. I mean, we and all the earth was created by God and for God. For what purpose? We sang about it a lot this morning. For His glory. And so that's the part of the passage I want to focus in on today, if we can. Still here in the passage, still on the Sea of Galilee there, still in this moment of storm, of dark, of rowing, and God is still allowing us in the storm, maybe even say appointing us to the storm. He's still seeing us in the midst of it. He's still rescuing. But here's the part I want to think about together today. Verse 48, and seeing them straining at the oars, for the wind was against them, at about the 4th watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea, and he intended to pass them by. Now, I mentioned this the last couple of weeks, but it bears repeating that this phrase, and he intended to pass them by, is not what we first think it is in our English language. That's not to say that the Bible is being cryptic on purpose, but this is very specific language that harkens all the way back to Exodus, when Moses finds himself in a storm of sorts, and he wants to know God more in the middle of the storm that he's in. He wants to see God's glory. Moses is a guy who had been put into some really tough spots by God, and Moses is obedient. And Moses, he just wants a glimpse. It's right after in the Old Testament, and if you're not familiar, that's okay. I would encourage you to go back and read the book of Exodus. It's really, there's a lot of stuff in there that can get kind of tedious in our reading, but there's a lot of action in there too. But this whole scene where Moses wants to see God's glory, it's right after they've come out of Egypt, and Moses goes up on the mountain, and they don't see him for a while. The Israelites are out there, and so they gather up all their gold and their earrings and whatever else they got, and they make a golden calf. And so the people are already messing everything up. They're already going against God, and God is holy and just and deserving of worship. And these people, his people, are profaning that with this calf thing. They're forgetting where they just came from. They came out of bondage in Egypt and into freedom. And with that freedom came this wonderful and beautiful, amazing dependence on a holy and miraculous God who delivered them and continued to deliver them, and had promised to keep delivering them. Why? For his own glory and for their good. Okay, so Moses is hearing from God, and he's seeing just how unruly and what a mess this is going to be. Not just in the moment, but what it's going to be to try to shepherd these people. And God is even saying he's about ready to just leave them to themselves. Yeah, I brought you to the edge of the promised land. I'm not going in with you. You're on your own. And Moses is like, if you don't go with us, there's no way. Anybody in here ever feel like that? God, I don't care what the promised land looks like. If you don't go with me, if you don't go with us, it's a mess. I mean, I feel that way about our church, right? I mean, if God does not go with us, go before us, has not paved the way, then no matter what we do, how big or whatever programs or anything like that, if it's not him, it's a mess. And Moses is awestruck by God's awesomeness in giving the 10 Commandments. That bears some... have you ever longed... This is going to sound like a dumb question to ask in church, okay? Have you ever longed to be free, like truly free of sin? Not free from the penalty of sin, but I don't sin anymore at all. I'm finally perfected. You ever long for that? And so Moses is awestruck by God's awesomeness in giving the 10 Commandments. How many of us would be like, yes, 10 Commandments? That's not who we are, right? It's not how we act. And he's awestruck in this deliverance and this holy mountain moment with God on Sinai. And then Moses says in Exodus 33, 18, the next part of the verse there, it says, I pray thee, show me thy glory. Of all the things that Moses could ask for, he wants to see God's glory. What he doesn't say, God, will you just make these people behave? He doesn't say that. He doesn't say, give us the straight road through all of this. He doesn't say that. He doesn't say, you know what, that manna stuff, that's pretty good. It's kind of like Frosted Flakes. I'm liking it. But can we have some variety in the menu? I pray thee, show me thy glory. Of all the things that you and me ask for, is this on our minds? In my darkness, in my storm, in my pain, in my good times, in my joy, all of it, Lord, I pray, show me your glory. So God answers Moses. Exodus 33:19, and he said, I myself will make all my goodness pass before you, and will proclaim the name of the Lord before you, and I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and will show compassion on whom I will show compassion. And there was only one limitation in this whole scenario, that Moses was not allowed to see God's face, because that would be just too much for Moses' human form to withstand. The glory of God's face would have obliterated Moses. Anybody in here, I say the word glory, and I've been in church my whole life, and you're like, yeah, but what is that? Like, what is glory? Well, I mean, we kind of, a sports star will make some kind of great sacrifice for the glory of the team. But what is that? Well, I think we can understand what God's glory is. It talks about it here in verse 19 when God answers. It's God's goodness, the proclamation of God's name, God's grace and God's compassion. That's His glory to the extent that any human can withstand it at this point with God. So God places Moses in a divot or a little cave, a cleft on the side of the rock, and he passes by Moses with all of that. And he places, I mean, we're using our own limitation of language, but he places his hand over the space until he passed by that, so Moses wouldn't see anything but his back. But this phrase, I myself will make all my goodness pass before you. Okay, so what's that got to do with Peter and the other disciples in the boat? They're on the Sea of Galilee in the middle of the night, in the middle of the storm. What's that? Mark 6:48. And Jesus, seeing them straining at the oars, for the wind was against them, at about the fourth watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea, and he intended to pass them by. This language is very specific. Jesus didn't mean to sneak by them. Like, ha, 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 look at you. You're straining at the oars, and I can walk on the water. He's not doing that. This is a moment of his glory on display. As we looked at last week, though, they weren't asking for it. They weren't looking for it. They thought he was a ghost or any other thing. They were just rowing in the dark, in the storm, against the wind. And Jesus sees them. And he comes out on the water to them. Now rescue is going to happen. Jesus knew he would rescue them before he sent them in the boat. The main opportunity here for the disciples is to see his glory. I know I'm really working through this passage slowly. I hope it's not boring or tedious to you, because I really think this is a revolutionary passage for our faith if we'll really get it. You see, storms will happen. Anybody know that to be a truism? Dark will happen. Anybody know that to be true? We know that. And we're wired by God to worship Him. And storms and darkness don't square up in our thinking with that initial, all the way back to the beginning, very good Garden of Eden creation that we were created for. So sin has obscured our view of God's glory, and this world is marred by sin. That's where these storms and this darkness comes from. But God in His glory and His goodness, His mercy, His compassion, He'll give us a view of His glory, and at the end of the day, that really has to be enough. And that's not a platitude. That's not a pat little Sunday school answer. It's not. And sometimes to even hear that when somebody says that this has to be enough, when you're going through really hard stuff, that hurts a little. But the hurt is that distance between the perfect and where we are right now. And God promises not to take away the storm, not to take away the darkness, not to take away this thing or that thing or give you better manna or whatever it might be. God promises He'll show us His glory. His glory is Jesus. His glory is the gospel of Jesus. But wait, there's more. The Exodus verse again, Exodus 33:19. Again, he's talking to Moses. God's talking to Moses. And he said, I myself will make all my goodness pass before you, and will proclaim the name of the Lord before you, and I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and will show compassion on whom I will show compassion. So there's this other part in there besides the passing by part. There's this, and will proclaim the name of the Lord before you. You see, that's part of God's glory, the proclamation of his name. So what happens back at our scene in the Sea of Galilee? Mark 6:48, towards the end of the verse there, he came to them walking on the sea, and he intended to pass by them. But when they saw him walking on the sea, they supposed that it was a ghost and cried out, for they all saw him and were frightened. But immediately he spoke with them and said to them, "Take courage, it is I, do not be afraid." That little piece there, "it is I." See, again, the language itself is pregnant with meaning, because that little phrase is the same as when Jesus declares that he's God in John 8:58. Ego eimi. Not ego, ego, lego, my ego. Sorry. Ego eimi. I'm pronouncing that part wrong, but I'll get this part right. I am. It's the same name God gave to Moses when Moses first asked God his name. Moses is like, "What's your name? Who will I tell the people that is sending me?" And God says, "I am that I am." In this whole scene, Jesus is giving the disciples a display of his glory. And the real thing, it's in the middle of the night, in the middle of the storm, in the middle of their rowing, in the middle of their fear, in the middle of their disbelief. And Jesus says, "I am." Verse 51, and he got into the boat with them, and the wind stopped, and they were greatly astonished, for they had not gained any insight from the incident of the loaves, but their heart was hardened. Dull as a rock, failing to put the facts together, and yet nonetheless they're being saved. Can I tell you that I feel like that is like the perfect summation of my Christian walk? Dull as a rock, failing to put the facts together, and yet he still chooses to save somebody like me. And in the moment, they miss it, but then later they get to reflect on this moment of God's glory. Anybody in here look back at your life and you can reflect on moments of God's glory? And I love that we can do that. I love that we're reflective in that way. But what would it be like? I don't know. Maybe it would mess it all up if we could see it in the moment, right? As we just move through, we're like, "Oh yeah, that's God's glory. Oh yeah, here it is again." But most of the time it's looking back and going, I was having that moment with Eric back here, our sound guy, this morning. We were thinking about all the times that, in spite of our stupidity, God had preserved us, maybe by microseconds in certain situations. It's pretty amazing. So I mentioned that some different details are included in the other accounts of this moment by Matthew and John. And one of those moments is kind of a big deal. And it's also very interesting that Mark doesn't include this part. So let's flip over to Matthew chapter 14, verse 27. So this part's the same. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take courage, it is I." So he said, "I am. Do not be afraid." Okay, so here's the additional part of the story. Verse 28, Matthew 14, and Peter answered him and said, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And he said, "Come." And Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came toward Jesus. So the only person to have ever walked on water besides Jesus, we got it right here in this passage. Can you imagine that moment? I mean, I can see it in my head. But like, if you're one of the other disciples, you're still deciding, like, is this Jesus or not? Maybe it's a ghost. And then Peter antes up. He pushes all his chips into the middle of the table and says, "If it's you, then have me come out there to you." But so Jesus called Peter to come in the middle of the night, in the middle of the storm, in the middle of the rowing, in the middle of the fear, onto the water. Jesus didn't make the waves calm down for Peter. Jesus made Peter able to walk on the waves in all the chaos. Verse 30. But seeing the wind, he became afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, saying, Lord, save me. I can identify with that too. Anybody in here ever have that sinking feeling? Even when you're doing what God told you to do, sometimes you feel like you're sinking. Even when you're being obedient, you can feel like you're sinking. When I was a kid, I was deathly afraid of the dark. Which is kind of funny. When I became a policeman, I got put on working nights. You ever get afraid of the dark? You ever get afraid of the storm? Do you ever get afraid that I can't row enough? I'm wearing out, Lord. I don't have it in me. That gnawing fear of sinking. Maybe you get out of the boat. Maybe you're walking in the midst of the chaos, and then it seems like it's just too much. But seeing the wind, he became afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, saying, Lord, save me. And immediately Jesus stretched out his hand and took hold of him and said to him, O you of little faith, why did you doubt? And when they got into the boat, the wind stopped. You know, we can read this, and we can read the New Testament. I mean, if we sat down and just started reading, even if you're a slow reader, within a couple days, if all you were doing was reading the New Testament, you can read it through pretty quick. How many of you would describe Peter in your own words as a guy of little faith? Yeah, he didn't have much faith. You see, Peter grew beyond this moment. This moment grew Peter. Now, it had the potential to wreck him, right? But it didn't. He grew beyond this moment. But here's the thing. Can you see, if what we believe about Mark's account is true, a lot of really smart scholars say that it's Peter relaying all of this to Mark to write down. Can you understand why Peter might have left this part out in talking to Mark about it? This is not his finest hour. I mean, he got out of the boat, but that's not what the focus was it? Now, something else amazing happens in the Matthew account. I mean, folks, I would want folks to know that I walked on water, right? If I'm Peter, I'm like, nobody else besides Jesus has ever done this. But I would not want to know about the whole sinking part, right? But this other thing happens in the Matthew account. And those who were in the boat worshiped him, saying, You are certainly God's Son. Even in all the chaos and what Jesus calls a lack of faith, after seeing all of this, seeing the display of God's glory in Jesus, in this whole moment, there's a moment of clarity, and the disciples make this declaration that Jesus is, in fact, God's Son. It's not a ghost that came out to us, it's God's Son. We don't even really know what that means yet. But you said, I am, and so you must be the real thing, and we don't even know what the real thing is yet. So even with hard hearts like Mark writes about, even with the dull as a rock, not putting the facts together mentality, Matthew still says they declare with as much understanding as they can muster that Jesus is the Son of God. Folks, you ain't got to have it all together. You don't have to have it all figured out. Trust me, at this point, I'm spitting everywhere. Get so excited. All right, trust me. At this point, with this passage, because we have slowed down, I've spent about 90 hours with this passage over the last several weeks. And I think I could spend a lifetime in this passage, continuing to figure it out. Because I see me and I see all of you in this passage. We are all in the boat. We're in the same boat. And with everything they can muster, that Jesus, you're the Son of God. So a couple of things here, and then I'm going to leave you to wrestle with the passage all on your own, okay? You get to spend your 90 hours with it. Fair enough? Anybody want to commit? Say, I'll spend 90 hours with these few verses. God's glory was being displayed regardless of the circumstances and regardless of the level of their belief. God's glory is all around us if we will open our eyes, if we'll put the facts together, if we won't be dull as rocks in our perceptions. That's not to be like, I can't remember what the kind of belief system is, but basically, oh, God is in that beam. No, I don't mean that. I don't mean like it's not like the Force in Star Wars where, his midichlorian count is really high. No. But we reflect His glory. We're made in His image. His creation reflects His glory. It's there to be seen. And God's glory is no less glorious in the middle of the night. It's no less glorious in the middle of the storm, in the middle of their rowing, in the middle of their fear. God's glory is still, it's glorious. His goodness, His mercy, His compassion, His name declared for all eternity, regardless of the storm. And the gospel, God's rescue mission, it's on full display in His glory. So hang on to that. Another point I want to grab from Matthew's account. Even though Jesus tells Peter to come to Him, Jesus is already on the way to rescue them. Jesus is already displaying His authority and power and majesty. Jesus has nothing to prove by allowing Peter to walk on the water. And you and me, we're people just like Peter. And you and me, we weren't really meant or designed to walk on water either. So God's glory, the gospel, the rescue mission, and the story of all mankind, isn't that enough for us? Is it? Or do we seek a sign? Something within ourselves to make it seem real, to make it seem real inside of us. This guy, Peter, this is a moment for Peter, but Peter wasn't designed to walk on water. I'm pretty sure Peter didn't have webbed feet. But Peter, that wasn't the thing that was going to mark him out as belonging to God. Peter was going to go on to cast out demons and heal people and even raise somebody from the dead. And he would spread the gospel far and wide. And he didn't do that because God went, oh yeah, I'm going to give you an interstate path to walk. And it's going to be smooth. Peter did it in the middle of storms, in the middle of chaos, in the middle of people hunting him down, and the people asking all kinds of questions of him, and how can this be true? And all his own Jewish people turning their back on him, his culture turning their back on him, and him kind of having to say, hey guys, no, it's got to be this way. It's got to be Jesus. God's glory through all of that shone through this guy Peter. It was a reflection. All right, Rich, you and the band can come on back up. Can I tell you that God sees you? Not like we sing about Santa Claus. He sees you when you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake. Here's the part that gets us. He knows if you've been bad or good. No, he sees you. He sees you in the storms that you're in. He sees you in every moment, in the joy, in the hardship, everything. And He intends to pass you by. Not nana boo boo, too bad for you, but to show you His glory. How will you respond? Will you respond, you are certainly the Son of God, like Matthew records? You see, worship is the right response. I read a commentary this week that I love the way they said it. The disciples have just seen Jesus walk on top of the water of the Sea of Galilee during a raging windstorm. They know He had to have walked 2 or 3 miles to reach them. At his call, Peter was also able to walk on water. Then, as soon as Christ climbed into their boat, the wind they had been battling all night instantly stopped. And this time, the men responded in the only way that made sense. They worshiped Jesus. They told him, "Truly, you are the Son of God." Worship is still the most rational response to recognizing God's power at work in our world. Worship still involves simply saying to God who He is and admitting who we're not. Worship recognizes God's glory. So the question is, do you? Do you recognize His glory? Will you recognize His glory? In this moment, I just want us to take a minute. We'll stand up and can we just pray that God will show us His glory and that we'll rest in that regardless of anything else? Go ahead and stand up here. God, in all of what we see around us and all the things that we could ask for this morning. Some folks in here, they're asking you for healing. Some folks in here are asking you for more proof of who you are. They haven't followed you yet, and they're trying to figure out if you're real, if you're true. Lord, folks in here are praying for lots of things. But in this moment, God, is a collective body gathered here, and the folks that are joining us online, we're crying out to you, God, show us your glory. And maybe more accurately, Lord, just open our eyes to it, to you. Open our hearts to you. Give us eyes to see you, Lord, ears to hear you, and hearts and wills to follow you. In Jesus' name, amen. If you don't know Him, please come to Him. He beckons you not to walk on water. He's not telling you got to get out on the lake. He's just telling you to follow Him. Repent of your way, of your sin. Confess Him as Lord. Cry out to Him to save you. And if you're ready in this moment to be baptized, to go under the water, the old creation, to come up the new, we have that ready too. But if you're not ready there, if you just are ready to have that discussion about who He is and what that means for you, I pray that you'll come up and we'll have that conversation, or go to the back and someone will meet you back there to talk with you. If you have a prayer need and you want to come up to the cross and just pray and be left alone, you can do that. Or if you want to come up and we can pray up here, we can do that as well. But don't leave this moment unchallenged. Amen? All right, let's sing.
Take my life and let it be consecrated